The 2022 college football season is just around the corner. We know there are going to be teams that surprise us, that disappoint us, that are breakout teams, and we always know there are teams that are going to be exceeding our preseason expectations or just are the most improved. Let's dive into the most improved teams in college football for 2022. I'm Steven Lassen of All CFB 365. Please be sure to subscribe to our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter channels at that handle. The first team on our list is USC. It's no secret the 2021 season was a disaster for USC. Clay Helton was fired early in the season. The Trojans finished 4-8. That was their worst season since 1991. But last year's is a distant memory, and at this point, you look at what USC has done since then, it's been nothing but good things for the program. Lincoln Riley was the offseason's top hire as head coach. He comes over after a successful stint at Oklahoma. USC also did a great job of adding through the transfer portal. Potentially up to 20 players could be added to this year's roster, including big names like Caleb Williams at quarterback, Jordan Addison at receiver. Significant help for a defense that ranked 11th in the Pac-12 in scoring and 8th in the conference against the run. As we turn the page to this year's team, I don't think there's any doubt that USC is going to have one of the best offenses in college football. They have firepower at the skill talent. They've got one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. The offensive line is also likely to improve from last season. Scoring points will not be a challenge, but if USC wants to beat Utah and push Oregon for second place in the Pac-12, it's going to have to be able to get stops on defense. But this USC roster is probably better than last year's record suggested. Combined with the arrival of Lincoln Riley and some key additions to the portal, I look for USC to be much improved in 2022. The second team on our list is Texas. No, we aren't saying Texas is back, but we do think that this team will take a step forward in 2022. Texas was 5-7 last year, and they missed some opportunities in the second half to close out games, could potentially have gotten this team into a bowl game. I think when you look at the reasons for optimism for Texas, obviously they have recruited well over an extended period of time. Talent is not an issue here, but Steve Sarkisian and this staff brought in key pieces on the recruiting trail and the transfer portal to bolster that roster this offseason. Quinn Ewers, the Texas high school standout who played 2 snaps at Ohio State last season, is back at Texas this year. He's a 5-star prospect. You look at the skill talent that Texas has with Bijan Robinson, Xavier Worthy, Isaiah Nayer, the transfer from Wyoming. Scoring points should not be a problem for Texas. There are some concerns about the offensive line, potentially could have a couple of freshmen up front for the Longhorns offense this year. But for Texas to contend for Big 12 title game appearance, to try and finish in the top 10 to 15 in college football, it's going to be all about defensive improvement. They gave up over 30 points and 200 rushing yards a game last season. So significant improvement is needed on defense. We will find out very early in the season how well this team has progressed since last season because they get Alabama in week 2. But Texas has talent. They have a better quarterback this year if Quinn Ewers works out. I like the skill talent. I also believe the defense will be better, maybe not the best in the Big 12, but I expect them to take a step forward. So I think Texas at least gets back to a bowl game this year and begins the process of turning things around in Steve Sarkisian's second year. The next team on our list is Nebraska. No doubt about it, Scott Frost has had a disappointing start to his tenure at Lincoln, at his alma mater, not to mention that this team is still looking for its first bowl appearance under Scott Frost. There's no doubt about it, though, that this year the pressure is on, considering that they are coming off a 3-9 record. Last year, there was the fewest wins by Nebraska since 1961. And once you take a look back at last year, a lot of Nebraska's problems were just small issues. You look at turnovers, they were 0-8 in one-score games. They had constant issues on special teams, also struggled in the red zone. If Frost and this coaching staff could clean up some of the small things that gave this program a lot of problems last year, that record that Nebraska has in close games should change in 2022. And when you look at the personnel coming back this year, the big news is the transfer addition of Casey Thompson at quarterback. Adrian Martinez transferred to Kansas State. In addition to Thompson, Mark Whipple, the longtime offensive coordinator, is taking over, and he will call plays instead of Scott Frost. So Nebraska has done a nice job of solidifying some of its concerns by bringing in an experienced quarterback. Mark Whipple, the veteran coordinator, should stabilize things on offense. The big question for Nebraska is still the offensive line. They have to do a better job in pass protection. They also have to do a better job of clearing rushing lanes in 2022. Defensively, this has not been a problem spot for Nebraska the last couple years. There is some turnover along the defensive line and in the secondary, but overall, I think Nebraska's defense should be a strength for this team this year. When you look at the schedule for Nebraska, they need to make up some ground early on because the back half of the schedule gets very difficult. So if Nebraska cleans up the small things, does a better job of minimizing mistakes, capitalizes on special teams this year, I think Nebraska and Scott Frost finally break through and get to a bowl game this year. Miami is the next program on our list, and change is in the air for Miami. Mario Cristobal has replaced Manny Diaz as the program's head coach. Also, the Hurricanes have made a big investment in facilities and assistant coaches, bringing over Josh Gaddis as offensive coordinator from Michigan. So Miami has made a lot of changes off the field that I think are going to work out great for this program over the long haul. As you look to 2022, a lot of reasons to believe that Miami is the team to beat in the Coastal Division. It starts at quarterback with Tyler Van Dyke. He's a rising star in the conference. Also, Miami's offensive line is ready to take a step forward. The only concern that you really have with Miami is the team's top two receivers from last year are gone. We'll see how Josh Gaddis and Mario Cristobal replace those two going into this year. Defensively, this is probably the biggest concern for this team. Last year, this group struggled, giving up over 28 points a game. Tackling was a major issue for the Hurricanes last year. Veteran coordinator Kevin Steele will be taking over the play calling duty. So there's reason for optimism for Miami, especially with some of the talent they've accumulated on the recruiting trail and in the transfer portal. Cristobal won't be able to fix everything at Miami in year one, but with Tyler Van Dyke leading the way, not to mention Miami's biggest competition in the Coastal Division is Pitt. Pitt comes to Miami this year. I like the Hurricanes to take a step forward in Cristobal's first year and win the Coastal Division. LSU is the next team on our list, and of course the big news in Baton Rouge this offseason was Brian Kelly taking over for Ed Orgeron. LSU has consistently been one of the wild card teams in the SEC, whether it was under Les Miles or whether it was under Ed Orgeron. I think Brian Kelly over the long haul sort of fixes that. LSU becomes more stable on a year-to-year basis. I think when you look at this year's team, there's no doubt about it that LSU has roster talent. They consistently rank near the top of the SEC in recruiting, but they only bring back 6 returning starters. Kelly and this staff have big question marks along the offensive line. Last year, LSU averaged only 3.3 yards per carry. They gave up 38 sacks. There's the quarterback battle between Jaden Daniels, Miles Brennan, and Garrett Nussmeier. Those two issues will be the deciding factor for this team this year. How well the offensive line comes together and what happens at quarterback, because I think the defense has a chance to be one of the better groups in the SEC. There's a lot of transfers stepping in the secondary, but the defensive front should be very good this year. This group improved late last season, so I think LSU can lean on its defense early on as the offense finds its footing. And when you're looking at the schedule, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Tennessee all come to Death Valley this year. So I think LSU from game 1 to game 12 will make significant improvements and will get to a winning record for the first time since they won the national title in 2019. The next team on our list is Florida State. It's a program that is hungry to get back to the postseason. Florida State has had 4 consecutive losing seasons. They did go 5-3 in their last 8 games last season, so there's some progress and some optimism for Coach Mike Norvell to sell this year. The optimism for Florida State, though, starts at quarterback with Jordan Travis. In the 8 starts for Florida State, and when Travis was in the lineup, Florida State averaged 32.8 points a game. In the 4 games that he didn't start, Florida State averaged only 17. So Travis's development at quarterback is huge for Florida State. He has to stay healthy. Injuries have been a problem for him throughout his career. As you also look at some of the other positions on Florida State's offense, the offensive line and receiving core, transfers have solidified both of those groups for Florida State. Those 2 groups should make a big improvement this year. Florida State's defense allowed 10 fewer points a game last year than it did in 2020, but the big questions will be how well they replace Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas off the edge. Those 2 players accounted for over half of Florida State's sacks last year. So Florida State's schedule is very difficult with LSU in New Orleans, and not to mention Florida in the non-conference game at the end of the year. And then, of course, in conference play, they'll play Clemson, they'll play Miami. So Florida State's upside in terms of wins is probably limited due to the tough schedule. But overall, I like the direction that this team was going in the second half of last year. And I think Florida State breaks through and gets to a bowl game this year. Boise State is the next team on our list, and while it may seem strange to list Boise State in the most improved category, this team only finished 7-5 last year. It was the program's fewest wins in a full season since 1998. I suspect that things will be a lot different for Boise State in Coach Andy Avalos' second year. This team got better throughout the course of the season. They really took it to Utah State and Fresno State last year. Defensively, this team should be among the best in the group of 5 and maybe even nationally, with 8 returning starters on defense for this year. The questions for Boise State, and it's pretty rare that Boise State has question marks here, but it's the offense. They averaged only 5.3 yards per play last year, not to mention just 3.1 yards per carry. Offensive line, establishing the run, keeping George Holini healthy at running back is a priority. They also have to replace Khalil Shakir, the standout receiver. So offensively, this traditionally has been a strength for Boise State, but that's where the question marks come into play this year. Boise State hosts San Diego State, BYU, Utah State, and Fresno State at home this year, so the schedule works in Boise State's favor. Last year didn't quite work out to meet high expectations, but I think the Broncos bounce back and win the Mountain West this year. Florida is the next team on our list, and what a difference a couple of months really made for this team. The Gators won the SEC East in 2020. They pushed Alabama early on in 2021, and it looked like this team was still going to be a top 10 to 15 team at the end of the year. But they ended up finishing 6-7. Dan Mullen was fired. Billy Napier was hired to replace him as head coach. I'm banking on Florida still having the talent in the program to get back closer to 8-4, finish in the top 25 this year. In order to do so, the Gators need to make improvement along the line of scrimmage. They need more consistency from the receiving core, and most importantly, quarterback Anthony Richardson has to take a big step forward. We've seen it in small glimpses of his talent, his potential, the big playability. I think Billy Napier, with his track record at Louisiana of developing good offenses, developing quarterbacks, that will help Anthony Richardson take a step forward this year. So picking Florida on this list requires a leap of faith of Anthony Richardson's development, but it's also a belief that Florida might not be as bad as its record indicated last year, and there's still talent in the program. The next team on our list is Washington. The 2021 season was an outright disaster for Washington. It started with a loss to Montana in the season opener. Eventually, Coach Jimmy Lake was fired. Kalen DeBoer, who was the head coach at Fresno State, he's been an offensive coordinator at other places before, is now the program's head coach, and it's a great hire because of his background on offense. That's where the Huskies need the most help. They average less than 5 yards per play, only 21 points a game last season. So I suspect DeBoer's background on offense will pay off right away. The Huskies have good receivers. They need better play from the offensive line and running game, but just having someone with the background of DeBoer should make a big difference. Washington has finished in the top 4 of the Pac-12 in scoring defense every year since 2012. That will be tested this year because they lose a lot of pieces off last year's group. They have some question marks about the ability to stop the run and at cornerback as well. Traditionally, Washington has been very good, as we mentioned. That may slip back a little bit this year, but if the offense takes a big step forward, as we expect under DeBoer, Washington should be able to get back to a bowl game. Most importantly, on the schedule, they do not play Utah or USC, and they get Oregon State in a key swing game in Seattle this year. Let's take a look at a couple group of 5 teams I think can improve this year. Akron, hiring Joe Moorhead was one of the better offseason coaching hires for 2022. I suspect the Zips will be much more competitive in the MAC. San Jose State finished 5-7 last year. I like the addition of Chevin Cordero at quarterback. I like San Jose State to get back to a bowl game this year. Southern Miss, 10 players attempted a pass last year. They had a ton of quarterback injuries. If Southern Miss has much more stability at the quarterback position this year, a bowl game is very much in reach. And for Tulane, 2-10, it was the worst season under Willie Fritz during his tenure at Tulane. However, this team had several small things go wrong, including turnovers, injuries, third down problems. I suspect that some of those close losses this year will turn into wins, especially with Michael Pratt leading the way at quarterback. And as you can see on the screen there are a couple other teams that we considered, including Arizona, Jed Fish's second year, bringing in a couple key additions from the transfer portal, including Jaden DeLora. We'd like Kansas to take another step forward under Coach Lance Leipold in his second year. South Carolina getting better with the addition of Spencer Rattler. The schedule was very difficult. However, keep an eye on West Virginia with the addition of JT Daniels. The Mountaineers could have an explosive offense while the defense takes a step back. That's our look at the teams we think will be the most improved in college football for 2022. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have some candidates that you think will take a step forward this year and that we didn't talk about on the video? Let us know in the comments. I'm Steven Lasson of All CFB 365. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page for more great college football content, and check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at All CFB 365.